Hello, today's video is going to help you prepare for the poetry exam. More specifically for section B, where you'll be asked to consider a random poem, a poem that the examiner's just tossed at you, you've never seen it before. You'll be expected to understand that poem, identify and analyse some of the language and structural techniques in there, and also talk about a theme that the examiner will cite or mention in the exam question. Now that's quite a big ask, particularly as you've only got 30 minutes to do it in. So, what I'm going to do over the next few slides is I'm going to pull up an unseen poem, you've probably never seen this one before, complete with a question. I'll explain some of my fascinating ideas about the poem, I'll analyse some of the language and the structural techniques in there, and then finally I'll give you some model responses, an introduction and a conclusion, and I'll also, with some of these model responses, I'll explain what I've done to make them such jazzy offerings for the examiner. Here's an overview of what you're up against. Section B is 30 minutes, as I said, and you've just got to look at one unseen poem. And personally, the way Mr. Taylor does it, doesn't mean everyone has to. You've got intelligent, well-qualified teachers who probably do it differently. I do 10 minutes analysis of the poem, about 18 minutes writing my response, and 2 minutes at the end, so critical, just checking that everything makes sense and that spelling and the punctuation is kosher. I'll spare you the gobbledygook of the examiner's mark scheme and just explain in plain English what it is you've got to do to secure the highest marks in this question. You need to comment intelligently on the themes or ideas mentioned in the question. There'll be a key theme that you've got to find out about in the poem. You need to support your comments with appropriate evidence. That means not putting in whacking great quotations, but kind of 5 to 6 to 7 word ones. It doesn't have to be a whole stanza, Where you can, it's not always possible, where you can, lock in on language, lock in on phrases or features, structural features that link to the key theme. And finally, make sure that you're analysing the effects of the writer's techniques and the effects on the reader, and evaluating simply means either pulling out an alternative interpretation for a piece of evidence or kind of delving back into that piece of evidence and trying to find a second technique, maybe alliteration or a plosive or onomatopoeia. Now, in a rare demonstration of charity, the examiner tends to go for relatively short poems, and the one I've got for you today is no exception. Now, I wanted to give you a modern one, but the problem is if I give you a modern poem, I'm going to get some modern poet phone me up and go, yeah man, love what you've done with my poem, yeah, that'll be 60 quid. And you know what, I'm not helping him out with his rent, so I've had to go for oldie worldy poems. This one is from 1941, and I don't have to pay any royalties on it. It is a shame that the poet died so young though, he was 19, which means he was barely older than you. And the guy was a fighter pilot who was shot down on a mission, but before his death he penned this poem about flying, which to this day is beloved of space cadets and flyboys everywhere. I mean, if you find a poetry buff on an airbase, you can bet the farm this poem is in his top 5. So let's get ready to take off, fasten seatbelts. Enough of the aviation jokes now, Mr. Taylor. Stick to the script. No winging it. Nah. And here is High Flight by John Gillespie McGee. I'll read it first and then we'll analyse it. Oh, I have slipped the surly bonds of earth and danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings. Sunward I've climbed and joined the tumbling mirth of sun-split clouds and done 100 things you have not dreamed of. Wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Hovering there, I've chased the shouting wind along and flung my eager aircraft through footless halls of air. Up to the long, delirious burning blue, I've topped the windswept heights with easy grace, where never lark nor even eagle flew. And while with silent lifting mine I've trod the high untrespassed sanctity of space, put out my hand and touched the face of God. Cracking little poem that. Now let's think what it's about. Now what it's about is... Whoa! You've missed a vital step here, Mr. Taylor, in answering these questions. Before you start laying down your oh-so-clever interpretations, do you know what? It might be a good idea to take a look at the question. Because not linking your analysis to the question means we're all wasting our time. To make up for that oversight then, here I'm giving you 2 slides for the price of 1. I'm giving you the question, and I've also slathered a bit of green paint on so you can see the keywords too. The question, in high flight, how does the poet present the speaker's ideas about flying? And as you know, I highlight the keywords just to get a clearer idea of what exactly it is the examiner wants from me. I've locked in on how. How might refer to the poetic techniques that have been used, be they language techniques, metaphor, simile, powerful verbs, alliteration, or structural techniques like enjambment, rhyme scheme. After that, I've looked at present. I've said this in other videos. Present is just a highfalutin term which basically means show to the reader or put forward to the reader. Often, if the examiner's bored, he might substitute present with show or explore, depict or convey. It's the same difference. Our primary keywords, though, are that last bit, the speaker's ideas about flying. That is clearly where we're going to be focusing our endeavours when we look at this poem, how the speaker's ideas about flying are put forward to us. Now I'll try and whip through this analysis section as quickly as possible, because in a couple of slides' time I think I lay on a summary of my findings. But I've locked in on surly bonds of earth. That's a nice metaphor there. And I've also looked at the powerful verb danced, which I guess is also a metaphor. Danced the skies on laughter silvered wings. I've highlighted mirth as well, because I think mirth links in with laughter and danced. There's a wee bit of enjambment later on, and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. And also, with my little mathematical hat on, I've realised that there's 14 lines here. Now a sonnet is a poetic form that's 14 lines long, so it's conforming to that poetic form. So you've identified these techniques, Mr. Taylor. Some language ones, some structural ones. Pat on the back for yourself. Now the hard work begins. You've got to start analysing those examples, considering what the writer's trying to say or show or do. And don't forget, if it's not linking to the question, which is about ideas about flying, you're wasting everyone's time. So let's look at that first metaphor, surly bonds of earth. Well, surly kind of means truculent or aggressive or reluctant. So it seems to be presenting the earth as reluctant to let the flyers go, almost like gravity wants to hold us back. Nice metaphor, that. We danced the skies on laughter silvered wings. Danced and laughter and mirth. These are all words that link with the idea of celebration. So I guess that's conveying the guy's delight in flying. Again, linking to the question. We've got the enjambment and soared and swung high. In general terms, you get a little hug and a cookie off the examiner if you say enjambment creates pace. But in order to get that A star to C, you've got to say why a poet wishes to create pace in his poem. We've got a bit of an easy win here. This is a poem about flying. So I think that enjambment kind of captures the speed and perhaps the fluency of a plane in flight. A sonnet is a poetic form usually traditionally used to present ideas about love. Clearly this poem is a celebration of the poet's love of flying. So we've got an interpretation there. You'll notice so far what I've done for all those examples, and this is fine, this will probably get an A, is I've given a good solid analysis of them. What I'm going to do now is a bit like double dipping. I'm going to go back into each of those examples, see if I can pull out another technique so I can show the examiner that I can't just analyse language, I can also evaluate it. We looked at surly, and look at bonds now. Bonds are like chains. Chains have got connotations of imprisonment. It suggests this guy's he feels more liberated and free in the air than he does on earth. Danced is a word that suggests grace, so perhaps it captures the kind of graceful movement of the planes. And you'll notice that example of enjambment and soared and swung high. You've got the repetition of and there, so it creates this almost like a childlike tone, capturing his excitement about flying. The sonnet as well, it is 14 lines. What's unusual though, a sonnet should round off with a rhyming couplet, 2 lines that rhyme. This doesn't. And I think we can do something here. We can say that he's defying the convention of the sonnet. And in this poem, he talks about defying natural laws. Earth wants to hold him back, nature wants to hold him on the ground because it's not natural for a man to be flying. and in a sense this poem, this sonnet that subverts or undermines the traditional format of a sonnet, there's a link there. We can forge some sort of link there. Here's a brief overview, a summary of some of my mad ramblings of the last 3 minutes, some of the interpretations that I came up with in relation to that poem, linking of course to the exam question, ideas about flying. Next step then, lay on a model paragraph. You know my method of operation. I highlight certain things in these model paragraphs and then explain why I've put them in. It's almost like deconstructing an A star, explaining how it works, how we go about getting those highest of grades. So feast your eyes on this little gem. I'll just give you a couple of seconds in case your contact lenses have steamed up in the face of such rampant beauty. Are we ready? Okay, I'll read it out and then I'll explain what makes it so good. McGee employs metaphor to present ideas about flying. He states, "I've slipped the surly bonds of earth." The word surly implies that gravity is reluctant to let the narrator fly. In a sense, he's defying and troubling nature by going up in an aircraft. Moreover, the noun bonds has connotations of imprisonment, which suggests the narrator feels trapped on earth and liberated in the sky. Next step then, let's look at why it's a winner. McGee employs metaphor. You recall the question was, how does the poet present ideas about flying? Well, metaphor is responding to that how bit. Present and ideas about flying, these were, if you remember, keywords from the question. So I'm definitely locked on to the task. There's no way anyone could accuse me of deviating from the question. He states, "I have slipped the surly bonds of earth." I've said this before, I've embedded that quotation. I've not just said I've slipped the surly bonds of earth. He states I have blah, blah, blah. It's just a little bit more fluent. The examiner likes that. Notice again, it's not a massive bit of evidence, is it? It's about 7 or 8 words. I've locked in on surly, implies is a lovely way to launch that explanation that gravity is reluctant to let the narrator fly. I've then given a second interpretation. This, I think, ticks the box for evaluation. Moreover, is that springboard into the secondary interpretation. The noun bonds has connotations of imprisonment. So I went back into that evidence, didn't I? Pulled out another technique and analysed it. And that suggests the narrator feels trapped on earth. If the term narrator is troubling you, it shouldn't. It's just a la-di-da term for speaker or persona. They're all synonymous. I just prefer to use narrator. This second paragraph, I'm just going to read out. If you wish, consider why I've put certain bits in bold. I'm obviously drawing your attention towards the ingredients of a star paragraph. There's further use of metaphor in the line where the narrator danced the skies on laughter-silvered wings, tumbling mirth. Words such as danced, laughter and mirth highlight the delight the narrator experiences when flying. Moreover, the verb danced captures for the reader the graceful movements of the aeroplane in flight. Here's my third paragraph. Now, if I'm brutally honest, given that I'm under the cosh and I've only got 30 minutes to write this response, if I don't get onto my fourth paragraph, I don't think that's going to be a showstopper, given the prodigious intelligence and high quality that characterises the 3 paragraphs I have done. So we'll read this one first. It is significant that McGee's poem is a sonnet. Sonnets traditionally explore feelings of love. This conveys the idea that McGee has a deep love of flying. Moreover, sonnets conventionally end in a rhyming couplet. By defining this feature of the sonnet form, McGee emphasises to the reader the idea, again, that manned flight defies the laws of nature. It challenges expectation. Now, hopefully, I'd get on to this 4th paragraph, but I'm always conscious that with 30 minutes to play with, I really am lionising and prizing quality over quantity. I'm sure, smart students that you are, you found other things that I could have analysed in that poem, High Flight. The name itself has great significance, but I've glossed over that in my rush to get some good quality responses down on paper. Let's have a look at this one now, the final one. Also, the writer's use of enjambment captures McGee's idea about flight. The narrator wheeled and soared and swung high in the sunlit silence. Enjambment creates pace. This captures for the reader the speed and fluid movement of an aeroplane. Also, the repetition of "and" captures a childlike tone of excitement and emphasises the variety of moves his plane can do. Just guide your attention here to the big slash between swung and high. That's because I'm talking about enjambment here, so I guess it doesn't hurt to just show where that line break would be. introduction and conclusion. A luxury, you might say, given the sparse amount of time the examiner's given you to play with. And I don't disagree. Time allowing, I would put a little line at the front of my response, the one in red there, and I'd also round off with the bits in blue. There's nothing fancy here. I'm not burning through the nation's ink reserves writing a massive whopping conclusion or introduction here, am I? These are masterpieces in brevity. The introduction, just in a sense, answering the question in a line or two. This poem presents the narrator's joy at flying. Manned flight appears to defy the laws of nature. And the conclusion is not too dissimilar, is it? To conclude, comma. The narrator employs techniques such as metaphor, ensemble and sonnet form to telegraph his love of flying and his experiences in the air. So in that conclusion, I'm just saying the techniques that were used and what that was intended to do, what the effect of that was. So let's cut this rant down. What have we learned? Well, when we're doing the unseen poetry question, we need to read the question and identify what the key theme or idea is that we're going to be responding to. We need to identify the poem's basic meaning. What is it about? Then we need to be looking for language techniques, structural techniques, perhaps something about the form of the poem, and then analysing or evaluating the effects of those techniques. And of course, in our exam response, we need to make sure we're exploring that theme from the question, supporting our ideas with appropriate evidence, nothing too big, and making sure, as I've said before, that we're looking at the effects of the writer's language and structure. And that's us, folks. One short poem, explained, analysed, and paragraphified, which I know isn't a word, but let's face it, it should be. Best of luck in the exam hall.